In the heart of Alexandria's Grand Palace, Cleopatra's court buzzed with intrigue, a haze of scented oils and murmured conspiracies. The scent of frankincense drifted through marble halls as advisors whispered of shifting alliances and Roman ambitions. The queen, poised and radiant, reclined on a carved ivory couch, her kohl-lined eyes scanning the faces of those around her. Each glance carried the weight of unspoken threats, promises, and ancient grudges. Cleopatra's rise to power had not been without struggle. As the last pharaoh of Egypt, she ruled not only with regal authority but with a cunning that rivaled even the most seasoned Roman senator. Her father's death had left a fractured court, siblings vying for dominance, and foreign powers circling like vultures. Yet Cleopatra emerged triumphant, a queen who turned every challenge into an opportunity, every betrayal into a stepping stone. A sudden hush fell over the room as a messenger entered, his face taut with urgency. "My queen," he gasped. "News from Rome." Cleopatra's gaze sharpened, her fingers tracing the gilded edge of her throne. She motioned for the man to continue. "Julius Caesar has been assassinated," the messenger blurted, voice trembling. Gasps rippled through the chamber, and even the marble pillars seemed to quiver. Cleopatra's mind raced. Caesar, her ally, her lover, the father of her child, gone in an instant, leaving behind a chasm of uncertainty. She stood, her golden robes whispering against the polished floor, and lifted her chin. "Summon my advisors," she commanded, her voice a steady melody of strength. "We must act swiftly." In the flickering lamplight, shadows danced like conspirators on the walls. The Roman Empire was in turmoil, and Cleopatra knew that opportunity often rose from chaos. Her kingdom's fate and her own would depend on the choices she made in the coming days. At the strategy table, maps of the Mediterranean sprawled across ancient scrolls, red lines marking trade routes and territories. Cleopatra's generals awaited her command, eyes wary yet expectant. She pointed to the port of Alexandria. "Ensure our defenses are strong," she ordered. "Rome may fracture, but their legions still roam the seas." Outside, the Nile's waters glistened under the moonlight, a silent witness to centuries of dynasties. Cleopatra's thoughts drifted to Caesarion, her son, whose destiny was bound to the empire's shifting tides. Would Rome embrace him as Caesar's heir, or would they see him as a threat to their fragile republic? As the hours passed, Cleopatra's court transformed into a forge of strategy and intrigue. Ambassadors from the east arrived, bearing gifts and veiled promises. Spies slipped through the palace gates with secrets from afar. Every whisper, every nod, carried the weight of empires. Yet beneath the surface, a deeper struggle raged within Cleopatra. Grief gnawed at the edges of her composure, memories of Caesar's laughter and the warmth of his hand in hers. But a queen had no time for tears. She was Egypt's sovereign, the goddess reborn, and the world watched her every move. She retreated to her private chambers, the night air thick with the scent of lotus and myrrh. There, amid silken cushions and gold-draped walls, she allowed a single tear to slip down her cheek. Only one, for tomorrow, she would face Rome not as Caesar's lover, but as Egypt's queen. The dawn broke with a crimson glow over the Nile, casting a fiery reflection on Cleopatra's gilded balcony. She stood tall, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the world beyond Egypt waited to pounce. Her court had assembled once more, each advisor vying for her favor, each voice clamoring to be heard. Yet Cleopatra knew that in the tangled web of politics, trust was a fragile thread. A senator from Rome had arrived overnight, his cloak still dusted with the grit of the desert road. He bowed low, a practiced smile on his lips. "Your Majesty," he began, his Latin accented but clear. "I come bearing urgent news from the Senate." Cleopatra raised an eyebrow, her gaze as cold as the Nile at dawn. "Speak," she commanded. The senator hesitated, his fingers drumming nervously on his scroll. "Mark Antony has summoned you," he finally blurted, his voice low. "He wishes to discuss the future of Egypt and your place in it." A murmur rippled through the court. Cleopatra's lips curved in a wry smile. Mark Antony, the powerful Roman general, known for his boldness on the battlefield and his appetite for pleasure. She had heard tales of his prowess, both in war and in wine-soaked banquets, but she also knew he wielded immense influence among the Roman legions. She dismissed the senator with a wave of her hand, her mind already whirring with possibilities. A meeting with Antony could be dangerous, but it could also be the key to securing her son's inheritance. The fragile balance between Rome and Egypt rested on a knife's edge. In the royal gardens, where lotus blossoms floated lazily on clear pools, Cleopatra pondered her next move. She called for her most trusted advisor, Charmian, a woman whose loyalty had weathered every storm. "Prepare the royal barge," Cleopatra ordered, her voice calm but resolute. "If Antony wishes to speak, then I shall answer his summons." Charmian bowed low, her eyes shining with pride. "As you command, my queen." That evening, under a sky streaked with fading gold, Cleopatra's barge set sail. It was a vessel worthy of a goddess, silken sails dyed purple, gilded oars dipping gracefully into the water. Musicians played soft melodies on lyres and flutes, their notes floating over the river like whispered promises. Perfumed air filled the barge, carrying the scent of roses and sandalwood. Cleopatra herself reclined beneath a canopy of embroidered silk, adorned in a gown of deepest indigo, a golden diadem resting on her brow. Her eyes sparkled like polished onyx, each glance a challenge, each smile a calculated weapon. As the barge glided down the Nile, the moon cast a silver path upon the water. Cleopatra's heart beat with anticipation, but her face betrayed nothing. She knew Antony's reputation, a man of action, a man who valued strength. She would meet him not as a supplicant but as an equal, a queen in her own right. At the appointed hour, Antony's camp came into view, a cluster of tents and banners, the Roman eagle emblazoned in gold. Soldiers in gleaming armor patrolled the riverbank, their torches casting a harsh light on the sand. Cleopatra stepped onto the deck, every movement a dance of grace and power. The music swelled as she approached the shore, a living vision of Egypt's glory. Antony himself stood waiting, his figure broad and imposing, a lion among men. His eyes met Cleopatra's, a spark of challenge and curiosity in their depths. As she descended from the barge, every step deliberate, every breath measured, Cleopatra knew that the fate of two empires rested in the space between them. She inclined her head, a subtle nod that spoke of strength, of destiny. "General Antony," she greeted, her voice a melody of honey and steel. "I believe you wished to speak." Antony regarded her with a mixture of admiration and suspicion. The stories of Cleopatra's allure had reached Rome long before she arrived on his shores. He had heard of her wit, her cunning, the way she could weave words into a web that ensnared even the most seasoned politician. But standing here, beneath the flickering torchlight, he saw that the rumors did her no justice. She was at once a queen and a living myth. "Cleopatra," Antony said, his voice rough from days of campaigning, "Egypt's queen and Rome's most intriguing ally." Cleopatra smiled, her lips curving like the edge of a scimitar. "You flatter me, General, but you did not summon me to trade pleasantries. Speak plainly." Antony's gaze hardened. "The Senate grows restless. Caesar's death left a void, one that Rome is eager to fill. Egypt's wealth is too great a prize to be left to chance. I've been sent to ensure your loyalty." His words were blunt, each one a hammer's blow. Cleopatra met his stare without flinching. "My loyalty," she said softly, "is to Egypt, but I know the price of defiance. You would rather see me as your ally than your enemy. I offer my friendship freely, but it must be given, not taken." A hush fell over the soldiers and attendants who watched from the shadows. Antony's eyes narrowed. He had expected a plea, a trembling queen begging for mercy. Instead, he found a ruler unafraid to match his gaze. "You're a brave woman," he said finally, "perhaps too brave for Rome's liking." Cleopatra tilted her head. "Then it is fortunate I am not beholden to Rome's whims." A flicker of amusement crossed Antony's face. "You speak like a sovereign," he said, "and yet, you know how fragile your throne truly is. You've made enemies in Alexandria. You've made enemies in Rome. Even now, the Senate debates your fate." Cleopatra's eyes glittered in the torchlight. "And you?" she challenged. "Are you my friend or my executioner?" Antony's breath caught, as if he were weighing the world's fate on his tongue. "I am neither," he said. "I am a man with a choice, and so are you. Stand with me, Cleopatra, and Rome will honor you as queen. Stand against me, and Egypt will burn." For a moment, the night air felt heavy with possibilities. Cleopatra sensed the path before her, branching like the Nile's delta. Each choice carried its own risks, its own promises. She took a step closer, her perfume wrapping around him like a spell. "I have stood alone before," she whispered, "and I have stood with allies. But I will not stand as a puppet on Rome's stage." Antony's hand hovered near his sword, but he made no move to draw it. "Then let us stand together," he said. "For now." Cleopatra's lips curved into a smile that could have melted iron. "For now," she echoed, her voice both promise and warning. A cold wind blew across the river, stirring the banners and the hearts of those who watched. Two empires had met on this sandy shore, and the world would tremble at what they might create. Antony offered his arm, and Cleopatra took it, her head held high. They walked back to her barge together, the night alive with the music of destiny. In that moment, Egypt's fate was sealed not by armies or treaties, but by the choice of two people willing to risk everything for power and for each other. The days that followed their alliance were filled with cautious celebrations and whispered negotiations. Antony made his presence known in Alexandria's grand halls, where Cleopatra's court thrived in a tapestry of luxury and intrigue. The city's palaces, adorned with golden columns and lush tapestries, became a stage where Rome and Egypt danced their dangerous duet. Cleopatra spared no effort to dazzle her Roman guest. Banquets stretched long into the night, with silver platters heaped with exotic delicacies and goblets overflowing with wine so sweet it clung to the tongue. Musicians played melodies that seemed to wrap around Antony's heart, softening his rough edges and drawing him into Cleopatra's orbit. Yet beneath the revelry, currents of tension swirled like the Nile in flood. Cleopatra's advisors argued in hushed voices, warning her that Rome's appetite for conquest was insatiable. They urged caution, reminding her that Antony's promises were as fleeting as a desert breeze. But Cleopatra, ever the strategist, saw beyond their fear. One evening, as the city basked in the glow of 1,000 oil lamps, Cleopatra summoned Antony to her private chambers. The room shimmered with incense smoke, the air thick with the scent of lotus and myrrh. She reclined on a couch of ivory and silk, her eyes glinting with the confidence of a queen who knew her worth. "Marcus Antonius," she said, her voice low and measured, "you have seen Egypt's wealth and beauty, but do you understand its heart?" Antony leaned against a marble pillar, watching her with a mixture of desire and suspicion. "I know you hold its heart," he replied, "and I know that heart beats faster when Rome stands beside it." Cleopatra laughed softly, a sound like silver bells. "Do not flatter yourself too much," she said. "Egypt has survived centuries of conquerors. From the Hyksos to Alexander, Rome is but the latest in a long line of suitors." She gestured to the painted ceiling above them, where scenes of ancient gods and pharaohs danced in eternal triumph. "We are older than your republic," she said. "We have learned to bend without breaking." Antony's jaw tightened. "And yet you sought my alliance," he reminded her. "You know Rome's power." Cleopatra's gaze never wavered. "I sought a partner," she corrected, "not a master." For a long moment, neither spoke. The city's sounds drifted in from beyond the balcony, faint music, laughter, the hush of wind through palm trees. Finally, Antony pushed himself away from the pillar and crossed to her couch. He knelt, his armor creaking as he lowered himself to eye level. "Then let us be partners," he said, his voice rough. "But know this, Rome's Senate is a nest of vipers. They will not forgive me for standing with you. They see you as a threat, a rival queen who dares to defy their will." Cleopatra reached out and traced a finger along the line of his jaw. "Then let them see me," she whispered. "Let them see the woman who will not bow." Antony closed his eyes for a moment, as if steeling himself against the fate he had chosen. "Very well," he said, "together, then. But remember, Cleopatra, every alliance comes at a price." She smiled a smile that spoke of secrets and shadows. "I have always known the price," she said softly. "I have paid it 1,000 times over." As the moon rose above Alexandria's gleaming rooftops, the queen and the general sealed their pact not with treaties or declarations, but with a single, unspoken promise: to stand together against the storm, even if the storm was Rome itself. As summer deepened over Alexandria, the partnership between Antony and Cleopatra grew in both strength and complexity. Their court, a fusion of Roman ambition and Egyptian grandeur, pulsed with a dangerous energy that threatened to ignite the world beyond their borders. Envoys from distant lands, Parthia, Judea, and even Rome itself, passed through the palace gates, seeking favors or offering alliances. Inside Cleopatra's palace, the air was thick with intrigue. Advisors in fine linen robes debated the latest rumors from Rome, where Octavian, Antony's political rival, was consolidating power. His spies whispered of a Senate growing uneasy with Antony's absences and of legions being raised in secret. Cleopatra listened, her eyes sharp, as priests interpreted omens in the flight of birds and the shape of clouds. Though she ruled with a golden diadem and a voice of honeyed steel, she knew her kingdom rested on a fragile thread. One morning, while the city's markets bustled with traders selling spices and silks, Cleopatra met with her closest advisors in a shaded courtyard. The papyrus scrolls spread across the stone table detailed Rome's movement's fleet positions in the Aegean. Troop counts near the Euphrates. A single name appeared again and again: Octavian. The young Roman, cunning and relentless, posed a threat that even Cleopatra could not ignore. Marcus Antonius must know of this, she declared, her tone leaving no room for argument. He must understand that Rome will not tolerate a divided command. They will come for him, and they will come for us. Her general, a seasoned veteran with scars on his face and arms, shifted uneasily. My queen, Antony is blinded by his affection for you, he said. His heart may be yours, but his loyalty is torn between Rome and Egypt. That division will be our undoing. Cleopatra's gaze sharpened. Then we must ensure his loyalty, she replied. We must remind him that his future lies here, not in Rome's cold embrace. She paused, eyes narrowing as if she could already see the battle lines forming. Prepare the fleet, she commanded. Send messages to our allies in Asia Minor. If Octavian dares to challenge us, we will be ready. Meanwhile, Antony himself wandered the palace gardens, his mind a tangle of conflicting loyalties. Birds sang in the tamarisk trees, and the Nile's steady murmur seemed to echo the uncertainty in his chest. He loved Cleopatra, of that he had no doubt, but every Roman bone in his body rebelled against turning his back on his homeland. A messenger found him there, breathless and trembling. My lord, the man gasped, Octavian's legions are marching. They have declared you a traitor to Rome. He has stripped you of your titles and condemned you in the Senate. Antony's face darkened. So be it, he growled. Let him call me traitor if he wishes. I will not crawl to Rome and beg for mercy. He turned his gaze toward the palace's tall towers, where Cleopatra waited. I have chosen my path, he murmured. Rome be damned. That night, Alexandria's skyline burned with torches as Antony summoned his generals. Cleopatra stood at his side, a vision of regal defiance. Together, they spoke of war of fleets to be gathered, legions to be armed, and alliances to be forged. The night air crackled with tension, for everyone present knew that the price of defiance would be high. Cleopatra, draped in a gown of gold-threaded linen, leaned close to Antony. Remember, Marcus, she whispered, you are not alone in this. Egypt stands with you. I stand with you. He looked into her eyes, and for the first time in days, he found solace. Then let Octavian come, he said, his voice steady. We will meet him on the field, and we will show him that the East does not bow to the West. So began the final act of their alliance, an alliance forged in passion and threatened by empire. Even as the city slept, the sound of soldiers drilling and blacksmiths forging weapons filled the night. Alexandria was no longer merely a city of beauty and commerce, it had become a fortress of defiance. A beacon of rebellion in the face of Roman ambition. And in the heart of it all stood Cleopatra and Antony, two lovers turned warriors, determined to write their names into the blood-soaked pages of history. As the days wore on, Antony's fleet began to gather in the harbors of Alexandria, massive triremes, their hulls freshly painted in the deep blue of the Nile, bristled with rowers and armed soldiers. Black smoke curled from the forges where weapons were hammered into shape: swords, shields, and spears meant to meet Rome's legions. Cleopatra herself moved through the docks, speaking with captains and shipwrights. Her presence inspired a fierce loyalty. Some called it devotion, others a curse. Inside the palace, scrolls from distant kingdoms arrived almost hourly, each bearing news that threatened to tip the balance of power. From Asia Minor, Cleopatra's envoys reported that some satraps were wavering in their allegiance. Others promised men and gold, hoping to gain favor with the queen whose influence stretched from the Nile to the Euphrates. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, Antony convened his war council in the palace's great hall. The room was alive with the scent of incense and the low murmur of guards at every doorway. Cleopatra sat beside Antony, her presence both regal and dangerous. My friends, Antony began, his voice steady despite the weight of the empire pressing on his shoulders. Rome's legions march for us. Octavian has declared me an enemy of the state, and all the legions who stand with him now bear the banner of my destruction. But I will not yield. He paused, letting his words sink in. Around him, his generals shifted in their armor, eyes glittering with both fear and determination. Rome under Octavian is a tyrant's Rome, he continued. He will crush every kingdom that dares stand in his path. He would make Egypt a puppet state, and Cleopatra a prisoner, or worse. Cleopatra's eyes flared. He will not break us, she said, her voice calm yet carrying a force that silenced even the most battle-hardened men. "This is our land, our people, and our destiny. Let Octavian come, for we will meet him not with submission, but with steel." The hall erupted in a chorus of shouts, vows of loyalty, cries of vengeance. Antony raised his hand, calling for silence. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered. We sailed to meet him at Actium. Cleopatra rose beside him, her gold diadem catching the light. "I will stand by your side, Marcus," she said, "not as a queen bound by politics, but as a partner in war. My ships will sail with yours, and together we will decide the fate of the world." That night, Alexandria did not sleep. The streets hummed with soldiers moving in formation, with traders loading supplies, with blacksmiths working through the dark hours. Even the temple seemed alive with the prayers of priests calling upon Isis and Horus to watch over Egypt's queen. In a quiet chamber overlooking the sea, Cleopatra and Antony stood together. Below them, the harbor was alive with the glow of torchlight and the creak of ship timbers. Antony's face was shadowed by doubt, though he fought to keep it hidden. "Cleopatra," he said at last, his voice barely a whisper. "If we fail," she turned to him, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. "We will not fail," she interrupted. "We have come too far, given too much. Let Rome tremble at our defiance." He reached for her hand, feeling the strength in her fingers. "Then let it be so," he replied, his jaw set with resolve. "We will meet Rome's fury with our own. Let Actium decide who is worthy of the world." Together, they stood at the window, watching the moonlight dance across the Nile. In that moment, there was no room for hesitation, no space for fear. There was only the promise of a final, desperate struggle, a clash that would echo through history long after the Nile had carried their ashes away. Dawn broke over Alexandria like a promise of blood and fire. The city stirred before the sun's first light, its streets filled with the sound of soldiers' boots and the clang of shields. Antony's fleet, vast and glittering beneath the early sun, lay anchored and ready. The scent of salt and smoke mingled on the air, a reminder that war was not just looming, it was here. Cleopatra's flagship, a grand vessel adorned with gilded prow and crimson sails, rode the water like a queen among commoners. She stood at the bow, eyes fixed on the horizon. Her gaze was unwavering, a silent vow that she would see this fight through to the end. Her hair, bound in braids and decorated with gold bands, caught the light like a flame. Inside the palace, scribes and priests carried out Cleopatra's final orders. Sacred scrolls were burned, treasures hidden or destroyed, anything to keep them from Octavian's grasp. Loyalists moved through the corridors with grim purpose, their faces drawn but determined. As Antony donned his armor, bronze and leather worn smooth by countless campaigns, he felt the weight of every battle he had ever fought. He remembered Caesar's campaigns in Gaul, the parades through Rome's streets, the triumphs that had once seemed endless. All of it led to this moment, a single choice that would decide everything. He found Cleopatra waiting by the harbor, her eyes like sharpened obsidian. She greeted him with a nod, the bond between them stronger than words. He took her hand, pressing it against the cold metal of his breastplate. "We stand together," she whispered. "Always," he answered. The fleet cast off at midday, sails swelling with the wind. Drums pounded, setting the rhythm of the rowers. Cleopatra's ships, sleek and deadly, took their place beside Antony's. Flags of Egypt and Rome intertwined on the masts, a reminder that this was no ordinary battle, it was the fate of two empires. As they sailed toward Actium, tension hung over the decks like a storm cloud. Soldiers sharpened blades, whispered prayers to forgotten gods. Officers barked orders, their voices rough with fear. Antony stood at the prow of his flagship, his eyes narrowed against the glare of the sun. Ahead lay Octavian's fleet, a wall of steel and fire that would not yield easily. Cleopatra moved among the men, offering a word here, a touch there. Her presence was a balm to some, a challenge to others. She was both queen and warrior now, and the men followed her not out of obligation but out of a shared destiny. On the horizon, Octavian's fleet grew larger by the hour. The Roman ships, disciplined and ruthless, formed an impenetrable line. Banners bearing the eagle of Rome fluttered in the wind. Drums sounded from their decks, matching the steady beat of Antony's rowers. The sea between them seemed to shudder with the promise of violence. Night fell slowly, a cloak of stars drawn over the waters. Torches burned low, casting shadows across the decks. Antony and Cleopatra met in his cabin, the flickering light painting their faces in gold and crimson. Maps lay scattered on the table, marked with notes and plans that felt as fragile as the paper they were drawn on. Cleopatra traced the lines with a finger. "If we strike here, perhaps we can break his line," she murmured. Antony shook his head. "Octavian's men are disciplined. They will close ranks faster than we can drive them apart. We must lure them into our trap." "And if they will not come?" she asked. "Then we make them," he replied. His voice was iron, but his eyes betrayed the fear that no plan could erase. Outside, the sea sighed like a living thing. Cleopatra reached across the table, taking his hand. "Whatever happens," she said, "we face it together." He nodded, the memory of their years together washing over him in a rush of images. Laughter in Roman gardens, the hush of Egyptian temples, the glow of Alexandrian nights. This was their legacy, now two empires bound by love and fate. Standing on the edge of ruin. As the night deepened, a restless wind stirred the sails. The scent of salt and fire carried a promise. Tomorrow would be the day they faced Rome's judgment. And in that darkness, with the Nile's current whispering of destiny, Cleopatra and Antony prepared to meet the dawn. The first light of dawn found the two fleets poised for the inevitable clash. Mist curled around the ships like a living thing, carrying the scent of brine and iron. Antony's men stood at their posts, eyes hard beneath their helmets, weapons clutched in trembling hands. The tension was so thick it seemed the air itself might shatter. Cleopatra's flagship loomed beside Antony's, its crimson sails a defiant banner against the gray dawn. She stood at the prow, her posture regal, the gold bands on her arms glinting as she raised a hand in silent prayer. The gods of Egypt had grown silent in the face of Roman ambition. But Cleopatra whispered to them anyway, calling on Isis and Osiris to watch over her people. On Antony's deck, the generals gathered for one final council. Agrippa's name hissed from every tongue, a Roman hammer waiting to fall. The sea between the fleets was a dark mirror, reflecting every fear and every hope. Antony's brow was furrowed with exhaustion, his once commanding voice now a hoarse whisper as he spoke of tactics and maneuvers that felt more like desperate prayers than plans. "Cleopatra's ships will strike the center," he rasped, his finger tracing a line across the chart. "When they engage, we'll break their flank. If the wind holds, we can drive them back and escape the trap." A captain shook his head. "And if the wind fails us?" Antony met his gaze, the weight of Rome's betrayal heavy on his shoulders. "Then we die with honor." Cleopatra turned from her prayers to face him. "We will not die, Antony," she said, her voice fierce. "Egypt does not yield so easily. If Rome wants our souls, they will have to fight for every drop of blood." He stared at her, the fire in her eyes a mirror of the flame that had once burned in his own heart. "Then let us give them a battle they will never forget," he said. The order was given, and the rowers bent to their oars. Drums thundered, there beat a promise of chaos. Cleopatra's fleet surged forward, her flagship leading the charge like a vengeful spirit. Antony's men followed, their cheers swallowed by the roar of the sea. Octavian's fleet waited, a wall of iron and discipline. His soldiers stood at the ready, faces hidden by the shadow of their helmets. When Antony's ships came into range, the Roman ballistae unleashed their fury. Flaming bolts arced through the sky, trailing smoke like comets. Ships burst into flame, screams tearing across the water. Cleopatra's flagship lurched, a burning projectile slicing through its main deck. Her men fought to douse the fire, their cries drowned by the clash of steel and the roar of the wind. Antony's flagship rammed an enemy vessel, the impact jarring through the decks like an earthquake. He led his men forward, sword in hand, his battle cry lost in the maelstrom. The sea churned with shattered hulls and dying men. Oars snapped, sails burned, and the scent of blood mixed with the salt spray. Cleopatra fought alongside her soldiers, her dagger flashing like a serpent's fang. Every time an enemy lunged, she met them with a ferocity that belied her slender form. But the tide turned too quickly. Octavian's fleet closed ranks, their discipline overwhelming Antony's desperate assault. Cleopatra's ships faltered, their line buckling under the relentless Roman advance. Smoke billowed from the decks, black as the wings of a vulture. Antony saw it happening, the slow, inevitable collapse. He screamed orders, his voice hoarse, but the sea was deaf to his commands. Roman soldiers swarmed the decks, their shields locked in an unbreakable wall. Antony swung his sword in wide arcs, each blow a defiance of fate itself. Cleopatra's flagship was surrounded. Antony watched in horror as Roman marines scaled its sides, the gold on their armor catching the sun. She fought like a goddess of war, her blade a blur, but even the gods could not stand alone against Rome's might. Desperation burned in Antony's chest. He shouted for his men to hold, to fight, but they were falling, one by one, like so many stars dying in the night. The sea was thick with wreckage, the cries of the dying blending with the hiss of flames. At the heart of it all, Cleopatra's voice rose, defiant and unbowed. "Egypt does not kneel," she cried. But Rome did not listen. The clash of steel and the roar of battle filled the air as Antony and Cleopatra's forces fought desperately to hold their ground. The once proud ships were now battered and broken, their sails torn and stained with blood and smoke. Men shouted orders, cries of pain mingling with the clash of weapons and the crashing of waves. Amid the chaos, Antony's resolve wavered but never broke. He moved through the fray like a whirlwind, rallying his soldiers and cutting down any who dared approach him. His eyes searched the horizon, looking for any sign of hope, any chance to turn the tide, but the relentless advance of Octavian's disciplined legions left little room for mercy. Cleopatra, too, fought fiercely aboard her flagship, her presence a beacon of courage for her crew. Though surrounded, she refused to surrender. Her dagger flashed with deadly precision, each strike a message that Egypt would never fall quietly. She moved with the grace of a panther, her voice steady even as the flames licked the wooden decks beneath her feet. As the battle dragged on, the sea itself seemed to rebel against Antony's cause. The wind shifted suddenly, filling Octavian's sails and pushing his fleet forward with renewed force. The Roman ships pressed their advantage, cutting off escape routes and tightening the noose around Antony and Cleopatra's forces. The weight of defeat pressed heavily on Antony's shoulders. He knew that the end was near. The thought of capture, humiliation, and the destruction of all he had fought for filled him with a bitter despair. Yet, even in this dark hour, his love for Cleopatra and his desire to protect her burned brighter than ever. With a heavy heart, Antony gave the order to retreat. The surviving ships turned away from the enemy, their crews battered but not broken. Cleopatra's flagship led the way, cutting through the waves as the remnants of their fleet sought refuge from the storm of battle. As they sailed away from the bloodied waters of Actium, Antony and Cleopatra knew that their fight was far from over. The Roman Republic had dealt them a crushing blow, but the fire of rebellion still smoldered within their hearts. They would need all their strength, cunning, and courage to face the challenges that lay ahead. The battle had been lost, but the war for their legacy was just beginning. In the aftermath of the Battle of Actium, Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Egypt, their kingdom now shadowed by the looming threat of Octavian's relentless pursuit. The once mighty alliance that had challenged Rome's supremacy was shattered, and the future of the Ptolemaic dynasty hung by a fragile thread. Back in Alexandria, the city buzzed with uneasy whispers and guarded hope. Cleopatra, ever the strategist, worked tirelessly to rally her supporters and strengthen her defenses. She knew that Octavian would not rest until Egypt was firmly under his control. And she prepared for the inevitable siege with determination and resolve. Antony, wounded in both body and spirit, struggled to come to terms with their dire situation. The grand visions of empire and glory that had once fueled his ambitions now seemed distant and elusive. Yet his loyalty to Cleopatra and his desire to protect Egypt remained unshaken. Despite their efforts, Octavian's forces closed in. The walls of Alexandria became the stage for a brutal and desperate struggle. As soldiers and citizens alike fought to defend their homeland, the city's streets ran red with blood, and the air was thick with smoke and sorrow. In a final act of defiance, Antony chose to take his own life rather than face capture and humiliation. His death marked the end of an era, a tragic conclusion to a story of passion, power, and betrayal. Cleopatra, facing the collapse of all she had built, made a fateful decision to avoid the indignity of being paraded as a captive in Rome. She chose death over submission. According to legend, she allowed an asp, a venomous snake, to bite her, embracing a quiet and enigmatic end. With their deaths, the Ptolemaic reign in Egypt came to a close, and Egypt was absorbed into the Roman Empire. Yet the legacy of Antony and Cleopatra endured tales of their love, courage, and tragedy echoing through the centuries as a poignant reminder of the fleeting nature of power and the enduring strength of human passion.